What would you do if your only daughter looked you in the eye and said, "Dad, this house isn't yours anymore. We've already decided it belongs to us"? I never thought I would live long enough to hear those words. I am Daniel Cross, 70 years old, a widower. A man who poured his whole life into one home, built brick by brick with my late wife, Mary. Every memory I owned was stored in those walls, and yet, in one cruel evening, my daughter, Emma, the child I once rocked to sleep, told me to leave it all behind, as if I were a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Her husband, Cole, stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes full of arrogance. Behind them, his parents shuffled through my living room, whispering about furniture, measuring curtains, pointing at heirlooms as if they were already theirs. My wife's piano, the grandfather clock, I repaired with my own hands. The dining table that had hosted every Thanksgiving. They touched them all with greedy eyes. I wanted to believe Emma was under pressure, that she was saying things she didn't mean. But when she repeated it, sharper this time, "Dad, you need to leave now," it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The cinnamon scent of the pie I had baked still lingered in the kitchen. I had been expecting dinner, laughter, maybe a reconciliation. Instead, I found myself holding my house keys in one hand, my heart breaking in the other. I knew enough about structures to recognize when one was about to collapse. Bridges don't fall all at once. They groan. They crack. They warn you before the final snap. And in that moment, staring at my daughter's cold face, I heard the first crack in my family, the bridge I thought would last forever. So I set the keys on the table. I said only 2 words. "All right." But inside, something else was taking shape. Not surrender. Not despair. A blueprint. It began with a phone call I had been waiting for months to receive. Emma's number lit up my phone on a gray afternoon in late February. My heart lifted before I even answered. She had been distant for so long since Mary's passing, pulling away as though grief belonged only to her. I thought maybe she was finally ready to bridge that silence. "Dad," she said sweetly, almost too sweet. "How are you?" The question sounded rehearsed, but I let myself believe it. Hearing her voice was enough to melt the loneliness that clung to me each night. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I miss you." Her laugh followed, but it was hollow, thin as glass. "I have a surprise for you. We're coming over tonight, Cole and I, and his parents. We want to talk." Talk. That word stayed with me long after she hung up. It was both promise and threat. I tried to ignore the unease pressing on my chest. Instead, I went into preparation mode like an old engineer dusting off familiar tools. I walked through the house, imagining her eyes on every detail. The rug Mary had chosen, the vase of tulips I replaced every week, the shelves lined with photo albums. I vacuumed the living room, polished the dining table, and laid out the best china. For dessert, I bought the lemon tarts Emma used to beg for as a child. My hands trembled when I placed them on the plates. I told myself this was a reconciliation, a new start. I showered, put on the shirt Emma once said made me look younger, and waited by the window like a boy before his first dance. At 7 sharp, headlights cut across my driveway. I straightened my collar and opened the door with a smile wide enough to hide my fear. They stepped inside like owners returning to their property. Emma's coat was black, her eyes sharp. Cole smelled of whiskey. His parents glanced around, whispering like appraisers. My heart faltered, but I clung to hope until the moment Emma spoke. "Dad, we need to talk about the future." And suddenly, I understood this call had not been about reunion. It had been about eviction. Emma did not sit. She moved past me and stood where Mary's sunflowers used to hang. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Dad. This will be quick if you cooperate. Cole put a printed folder on the table. It had colored tabs. I recognized the confidence of people who think paperwork is the same as truth. He tapped the top page with one finger. We have a plan for the house. It is safer if we manage it. You are getting older. It is time. His parents drifted in like a tide. The mother introduced herself as Serena. Her perfume was heavy and sweet. The father said his name was Victor and looked around with a real estate agent's stare. He lifted the corner of Mary's lace runner and made a small face. Not our style, he said. Serena wrote something in her phone. I tried to catch Emma's eyes. I found only glass. I made tea. I said, let us sit. We can talk like family. I slid a cup toward her. She did not touch it. There is no need to talk in circles, she said. We will move in next week. You can take essentials tonight. Cole's parents will help store the rest. We will keep your photo albums. The words spilled like cold water. They had rehearsed them. They had practiced saying my life in pieces. I straightened the runner. I smoothed it as if the cloth could calm the air. Emma, this is my home. Your home is where you and Cole live. This house is where you were raised. It is where your mother died. It is not a spare. Cole's jaw tightened. We spoke to a lawyer, he said. He used the word liability. If you fall on the stairs, the house is at risk. If the pipes burst, the house is at risk. If you forget the stove, the house is at risk. We will remove the risk. Serena had opened the china cabinet. She held up Mary's blue plates one by one and set them down without care. Victor measured the window frame with a metal ruler and wrote numbers on my grocery list. Emma's voice wove through their movements like a thin wire. Dad, it will be easier if you do not resist. We found you a place by the harbor. They have a shuttle to the store and a nurse at the desk. I felt my breath go shallow. I looked at the lemon tarts on the plates I had polished until my wrists ached. I had baked them last on Emma's 10th birthday. She had eaten 2 and asked for a 3rd. I remember the crumbs on her dress. I remember Mary laughing and wiping her mouth with a napkin. The memory did not help me now. I took the keys from my pocket. They were warm from my hand. I set them down, then slid them back to me. Not yet. I did not raise my voice. I learned long ago that bridges fail fastest when you strike them in anger. I would not give them that storm. You want me gone, I said. Say it with your whole voice. Not with folders and rulers. Say it as a daughter to a father. Emma flinched. Only for a second. Then her face went still. We need the house, she said. We need the equity. We need the space. You need care. This is the rational choice. Victor cleared his throat. We can give him 1 hour, he said. Serena nodded. Emma. Go, start the car. Cole. Get boxes. Cole moved first. He took the framed wedding photo from the mantel and set it face down on the table. He lifted the lid of the piano and hit a single note. It hung in the room like a question that already knew the answer. I felt something shift inside me. Not a snap. A click. I went to the bedroom. I opened the top drawer where Mary once kept her scarves. The faint scent of lavender lived there still. I folded 2 shirts. I took the sweater Mary liked on me. I took a book and my reading glasses. I took the small tin with our travel coins that no one else would value. I put Nora's ring, which hung on a chain, around my neck. I looked at the bed where I had slept alone for 3 winters. I made it as tight as a hospital corner. I shut the light. In the hallway, I met Serena with a box. She tried to squeeze past. I held my ground. She stepped back and smiled, a tight smile that showed perfect teeth. This will be better for everyone, she said. Better echoed in my head. It always means someone has decided you do not get a say. Emma waited by the door with my coat. She held it out and did not look at me. I took it and put it on. My hands were steady. Her eyes were not. In the kitchen, Cole was labeling a box with a black marker. He wrote Dad on the side. The word looked wrong in his hand. He taped it shut with a final slap and slid it toward me with his shoe. There you go, he said. All set. I picked up my keys. I set them down again. I reached for the blue bowl with the sparrow Mary had found in a small shop by the Cape. The glaze was chipped at the rim. She had loved it for the flaw. I held it in both hands. I knew then I could not take much. I did not need much. I walked to the door. The night had fallen while we rearranged the meaning of family. The porch light made a yellow circle on the snow. Emma touched my sleeve. Her fingers were cold. She whispered, "Please try to understand." I looked at her and saw the child who had once climbed my shoulders to see fireworks. I saw the woman who now asked me to step off a ledge she had cut away. I put the keys in her palm. The metal clicked against her wedding band. "All right," I said. "I am going now. Keep the lights on. You will need them." I stepped into the cold and felt it clean my lungs. Behind me, the door closed with a soft seal. I stood on the porch and listened. Through the wood I heard their voices, low and busy, dividing and assigning. I walked to the street with my box and my bowl. The snow squeaked under my shoes. The car started. The engine sounded like a saw. At the curb I turned back for one last look. The window glowed. A shadow crossed where Mary used to wave me in for supper. I wanted to pound the glass. I wanted to shout my name into the frame. I did neither. I set the box in the trunk and placed the bowl on the passenger seat. I rested my hand on the rim and felt the old chip under my thumb. It steadied me. I pulled away as slowly as a man, leaving a hospital at night. I drove past the oak tree that threw its arms over the street. I passed the school where I had laughed at plays on folding chairs. I passed the bench where Mary had said yes to a man who had nothing but blueprints and a promise. Every place touched my skin as I went by. At the end of the block, the light turned red. I waited. A bus rolled past. I watched faces lit by their phones. No one looked out. The light turned green. I went forward into a city where my name opened no doors. I did not cry. Not yet. I was counting. I was measuring. I was listening for the next crack. I was already drawing a new line. The motel room smelled of bleach and stale smoke, though the clerk swore it was a non-smoking unit. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. The carpet was rough under my shoes, and the lamp flickered when I turned it on. I set my box on the bed, then placed the sparrow bowl on the table with the reverence of an altar. That was all I had carried from the life I built for 70 years. I sat on the mattress and felt the springs complain. Outside, trucks rumbled down the highway, their horns echoing through the thin walls. I should have cried then, but my eyes stayed dry. Grief is a stubborn guest. It comes when it wants, never when you invite it. I opened the box. 2 shirts, 1 sweater, a book with a cracked spine, my glasses, and inside, Mary's ring on its chain. I slipped it over my neck. The metal was cold against my chest, but it warmed as I held it. I whispered her name as if she might answer. In the quiet, I remembered our first night in that house. We were young, broke, and giddy. We slept on the floor on a mattress borrowed from my brother. Rain tapped the windows, and Mary said, "This is ours, Daniel. No matter what, this will always be ours." I believed her then. I wanted to believe her still. But the echo of Emma's voice telling me to leave kept cutting through. I turned on the television, hoping noise might drown memory. Bright colors and strangers' laughter filled the screen. But I could not follow the plot. I turned it off again. The silence returned. Heavier this time. I made coffee with the motel pot. It tasted like burnt plastic, but I drank it anyway. When midnight came, I opened my notebook, an old habit from my years as an engineer. I always solved problems with a pencil first. I drew columns, resources, obstacles, unknowns. Under resources, I wrote savings account, pension, knowledge, time. Under obstacles, I wrote betrayal, loneliness, age. Under unknowns, I wrote one word. I stared at her name until it blurred. Was she truly lost to me? Or had she been consumed by the hunger of the people around her? I wanted to think she might return. But the look in her eyes when she handed me my coat had been sharp as glass. That look was not confusion. It was conviction. I lay down with the sparrow bowl on the nightstand, Mary's ring warm against my skin, and the notebook open beside me. Sleep did not come easily. The highway hummed. Doors slammed in the hall. Somewhere above me, someone argued loud enough to rattle the vent. I closed my eyes and saw Emma as a child, running in the yard with her red ribbon trailing behind her. I reached out in the dark, but my hand found only the coarse blanket of the motel bed. Morning brought a gray light through thin curtains. I sat up and felt the ache in my bones, but also a sharper ache in my chest. I had lost my house, my daughter, my place. Yet, as I poured another bitter cup of coffee, a thought came to me clear as a bell. They believed I was finished. They believed I would fade quietly. But they had forgotten one truth. He studies the crack. He listens to the strain. And then he plans. That morning I promised myself I would not die in a motel room with nothing but regret. I would rise. I would measure. And I would return. On the second morning I woke before the trucks. Coffee hissed in the metal pot and filled the room with a burnt smell. I opened my notebook and redrew the columns. This time I gave them names. Phase 1 was shelter. Phase 2 was sight. Phase 3 was leverage. Phase 4 was law. Shelter first. I could not think clearly in a room that shook with every passing rig. I walked along the strip and found a small real estate office between a laundromat and a diner. A young agent with freckles listened while I described what I needed. Month to month. Quiet. A first-floor unit because my knees complained in winter. By evening I had keys to a modest apartment 2 miles from my house. It faced a narrow street lined with maples. The windows were clean. The fridge hummed like a promise. Sight next. A builder learns that what you cannot see will hurt you first. I bought binoculars and a small camera with a long lens. I purchased a prepaid phone and paid cash. I wrote every serial number in my notebook. I told myself I was not stalking anyone. I was collecting measurements. I made a calendar of the people who now filled my home. Emma left for work at 7. Cole left later and returned at odd hours. Serena liked to arrive midday and fuss with the curtains as if moving fabric could make a life fit. Victor came with a tape measure and a clipboard. I watched from the park across the street with a book open in my lap. I pressed the shutter only when I needed to remember something exactly. Leverage would come from truth, not rumor. I spent afternoons at the public library where light falls through tall windows. The librarian showed me how to search property records and court dockets. I learned which offices hold permits for renovations, which ledgers list liens and late taxes, which sites post lawsuit calendars. Public information is an honest river. You can step into it without hiding. In the evening I cooked simple meals and read the manuals that came with my devices. I practiced with the camera until my hands remembered the weight. I tested the voice recorder by reading Mary's favorite poem aloud. Hearing my own voice in the empty room felt strange and then useful. Evidence is not only paper. It is sound and timing and the way a person pauses before a lie. I called my bank and asked for a full review of every account with my name. Years ago, I had opened a small learning account for Emma when she got her first summer job. I wanted her to feel the pride of a deposit. The banker confirmed my name still sat on the profile as a co-owner, even though the balance lived in her hands. I requested alerts for any large withdrawal and set limits allowed by our agreement. I did not touch a cent. I needed only a bell that would ring if the water rose. At night, I wrote letters I did not send. One to Emma, telling her where the first crack had begun the day she chose silence over honesty. One to Mary, telling her I had failed, and yet I would try again. I folded the letters and placed them under the bowl. They pressed the paper flat, the way the sea smooths glass. I met with a lawyer recommended by the agent. She was direct and kind. I brought receipts for the roof, the stairs, the furnace I had replaced last fall. I brought photos of the work and the dates on my calendar. She explained my rights with careful words. If you invested your money and labor, the court can see you. If they used intimidation or fraud, the court can hear you. I said I was not ready to file. She nodded and told me to keep everything organized. The law moves best when the path is clear. I made copies of everything and stored them in more than one place. One set in a folder above the fridge. One set in a locked drawer by my bed. I bought a fire safe and slid the thinnest set inside. I slept better that night for the first time since the door had closed behind me. Before dawn, I walked the block around my old house. Frost silvered the hedges. A single light burned in the front room. On the porch rail, a realtor sign leaned face down. I took out my notebook and wrote one line. They planned to sell what they did not build. After breakfast, I practiced what I would say when the time came to stand in front of a judge. I kept the sentences short. I made them as clean as a blueprint. I did not write the word revenge once. I wrote other words instead. Repair, restore, protect. When I finished, I cleaned the apartment with the care I had given our first home. I scrubbed the sink until it shone. I opened the window and let in the winter air. I placed the sparrow bowl in the center of the table and watched the light pool inside it. I whispered 3 promises to the room. I will not act in anger. I will not lie. I will not quit. The plan did not make me feel powerful. It made me feel steady. Power flares and burns. Steadiness holds when wind rises. I closed the notebook and put the pencil on top. The page was full now. Lines drawn. Phases named. Tasks set. I sat still and listened to the city start its day. A delivery truck hissed to a stop. A child laughed. A phone rang somewhere. Mine had already rung. Next time it would be my turn to call. I learned quickly that the strongest walls hide the deepest cracks. The Millers, Serena, and Victor wore polished smiles when they walked through my house. But numbers do not smile. Numbers reveal. I spent long afternoons at the county office pulling records that anyone could see if they cared to look. I cared more than anyone. Victor's name appeared in business filings that ended in dissolution. A construction company registered 5 years ago. Dissolved after unpaid taxes. A restaurant venture with his brother. Closed with liens still open. I wrote dates. Case numbers. And amounts in my notebook. The way I once calculated the stress points of a bridge. Serena's name showed up only on credit applications. Most of them denied. Dependence disguised as confidence. Cole was easier. I watched him from across the bar at a casino on the riverfront. He threw chips faster than he could count them. His glass never empty. The dealer's expression told me this was routine. When he stumbled away from the table, I followed at a distance. Outside, he argued with a man in a leather jacket. Money changed hands. I clicked the shutter of my camera twice. Evidence does not blink. A week later, I tracked him to a downtown cafe. He was not alone. A woman with auburn hair leaned close, her hand brushing his arm in a way no colleague would risk. when she kissed him before slipping into a silver car. I took 6 photos in quick succession. The lens caught his ring glinting in the weak sunlight. Proof. Emma remained the hardest. My daughter. My blood. She worked at a law firm as a paralegal. Steady hours. Steady pay. But steady does not mean solid. I sat in the library scrolling through financial databases. Her credit reports carried balances near their limits. A car loan barely serviced. And then the joint account, our old account. The one I had opened when she was 16. She had forgotten my name still carried weight there. I did not touch her money. But I tracked every movement. Withdrawals came too fast. Rent. Groceries. Clothing charged far beyond her means. She was sinking and did not even notice the water above her chin. I began to assemble files, the way an engineer gathers steel beams. Each piece fit into the next. Cole's gambling. His affair. His drinking. Victor's failed ventures and unpaid debts. Serena's dependence and fragile credit. Emma's financial cracks spreading wide. The house was not their sanctuary. It was their last chance. They had taken it from me, not out of love for it, but out of desperation. I pinned photographs to the corkboard above my desk. Cole hunched over cards. Cole kissing the woman by her car. Victor signing papers at the courthouse. Serena slipping into a jewelry store but leaving empty-handed. Emma staring at her phone in the office lobby with a frown deep as a canyon. Beneath each photo, I taped a note with times, dates, and places. I watched the web grow tighter. One evening, I sat at my table with the sparrow bowl in front of me and whispered Mary's name. I wanted her counsel, her softness, her way of seeing beyond anger. But all I had was the echo of her voice in my head. She would have said, "Do not let bitterness guide you." I promised her I would not. But I also promised myself I would not be erased. I wrote the word leverage at the top of a clean page. Underneath, I listed each name and their weakness. Cole. Infidelity. Alcohol. Victor. Tax debt. Failed businesses. Serena. Credit dependence. Shallow alliances. Emma. Debt. Poor judgment. Blindness to danger. One by one. I underlined each. Weak beams in a bridge I was ready to test. When I closed the notebook, I felt no triumph, only resolve. The cracks were real, and I would use them, not with rage, but with the same precision I had used all my life. Measurement, calculation, patience, and when the moment came, they would understand what it means when a man who builds does not quit. He rebuilds. And he restores balance. I chose a Monday. Mondays are made for clean starts and hard truths. At sunrise, I brewed coffee and lined up the files like tools. Cole. Victor. Serena. Emma. I touched each folder once. Then opened the one with the heaviest weight. The bank. The joint account still carried my name. Years ago, it had been a lesson for a teenager about saving. Now it was a bell I could ring without taking a single dollar. I called the branch manager and asked that notices be sent for any large withdrawals and that new limits follow the rules of the original agreement. I did not freeze funds. I did not drain them. I simply turned on the light. She confirmed the alerts with calm words. I walked to the post office with a small stack of envelopes. One was addressed to the State Revenue Office. Inside sat copies of Victor's unpaid taxes and his suspended licenses, all taken from public files. I wrote a short cover letter that said only this: "Please review. I believe these records show irregularities." I signed my name. I did not hide. I did not accuse. I requested. The next envelope went to the City Building Bureau. It contained copies of permits that did not exist for the alterations already started in my old house. Serena had men remove railings and tear down a wall without inspections. I had photographs taken from the sidewalk and dates to match. The letter asked for a safety check. Bridges fail when people skip the small rules. Houses fail the same way. The third envelope was thick. It held photographs of Cole at the casino and statements from a bartender, along with time-stamped receipts of cash advances. It also held the 6 photos of him kissing the woman by her car during office hours. I sent it to the Human Resources office at his company with a short note. I am concerned about an employee whose choices may expose the company. Please review and handle according to your policies. I did not ask for a firing. I asked for review. When the mailman slid the envelopes away, I felt a quiet settle in my chest. Not triumph, not fear, just the sense that a lever had met its fulcrum. I walked for an hour to steady my hands. Back at my apartment, I sat with Emma's folder. I wrote her a letter I did not send. I told her how I set alerts on the old account and why. I told her I would not let my name be used to buy the rope that would hang us both. I told her I loved her. I folded the letter and slid it under the sparrow bowl with the others. Love is not a lever. It is an anchor. It holds you still while you choose. By noon, my phone buzzed. The bank's notice arrived. Attempted withdrawal exceeded the limit. A second buzz came 2 minutes later. A third at 10 past. I pictured Emma at the counter, her face going from puzzled to flushed to brittle. I set the phone face down and kept breathing. I had asked for a bell. The bell was ringing. At 2 o'clock, I received an email from the city. An inspector would visit the property this week to verify safety. At 3, I got a reply from the revenue office that my submission had been recorded and assigned a number. Government moves like a heavy ship. Slow at first. Relentless later. Near evening, I walked past my old block. A contractor van idled at the curb. 2 workers loaded drywall into the back and watched the front door. Serena stood on the porch, speaking quickly into her phone. Victor paced with a folder tucked under his arm. Cole came out with a red face and a thin smile that showed too many teeth. Emma did not appear. A part of me wanted to call her name from the sidewalk. I kept walking. Back home, I set the recorder on the table and practiced what I would say if she phoned. I wrote every sentence. I will not argue. I will not explain again. I will not raise my voice. I will meet with a banker or a lawyer present. I am protecting myself. I will not be erased. At night, I stood at the window with the lights off and the bowl in my hands. The glaze caught the city glow and held it like a small moon. Mary once said that mercy is not weakness. I repeated that line until it fit in my mouth again. Mercy without boundaries is surrender. Mercy with a spine is justice. That was the road I had chosen. The phone rang a little after 9. I let it ring 3 times, and then I answered. Emma's voice came thin and tight. Dad, there is a problem with the account. They say you changed the settings. I kept my tone even. I asked for alerts and limits allowed by our agreement. It protects you. It protects me. She said she could not pay rent. She said the card declined at the store. I told her to breathe. I told her to speak to the banker and to check her budget. I told her I would not remove the guardrails. She accused me then. She said I was punishing her. I said I was preventing a fall. She cried. The sound hurt worse than the night she sent me away. I said we could meet at the bank with a manager present. I would not discuss it at the house. She hung up without goodbye. I stood still until the room stopped swaying. Then I wrote a final line in my notebook. The first blow has landed. Damage assessed. Structure holding. Proceed to the next phase in daylight. The week unfolded like watching beams snap one after another under weight too heavy to bear. By Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed with 4 more alerts from the bank. Each attempt to withdraw funds failed. Each denial sharp as a hammer strike. Emma left 2 voicemails that began in anger and ended in sobs. I listened once. then filed them in a folder labeled Proof. I had no joy in saving them. Only the cold discipline of a man who knows every note of a structure's collapse must be recorded. At noon, I positioned myself near the office tower where Cole worked. An hour later, he stormed out, his tie loose, his face pale. Behind him trailed two supervisors carrying folders. I snapped photos as he shouted into his phone, waving his arms like a man drowning. He had been fired. The company valued stability. They could not afford an employee whose gambling debts and weekday drinking left a trail of witnesses. By evening, Emma's voice through the recorder I had planted near the porch cracked with fury. "You've ruined us," she screamed at him, and his reply, hoarse and slurred, "You were the one who wanted the house. You were the one who pushed your father out." Their words sliced through the night like steel cables snapping. Thursday brought more strain. A white sedan from the city parked at the curb. An inspector stepped out with a clipboard. He spent 2 hours inside, then emerged shaking his head. He placed a bright orange notice on the door before leaving. I zoomed in with my lens. Unsafe. Alterations. Stop work order effective immediately. Serena tore the notice down as soon as he left. But paper carries weight when backed by law. She stuffed it in her bag, eyes darting around, shoulders tight. Friday morning brought the heaviest blow. A letter arrived from the State Revenue Office addressed to Victor. I watched him open it on the porch, his face shifting from confidence to terror. His lips moved as he read, eyes scanning line after line. He crushed the paper in his fist. But I had already captured the moment in 3 photographs. A man cornered not by rumor but by numbers. Numbers do not lie. By the weekend, the house sounded different through my recorder, no longer full of triumphant voices but of slammed doors, muffled arguments, and Emma's crying late at night. Once I heard her whisper, "Maybe Dad was right. Maybe we should never have done this." Cole shouted back, "Shut up. It's too late." Victor paced the floorboards, his heavy steps carrying the rhythm of a man calculating debts he could never repay. Serena tried to soothe them all, her voice soft but brittle, like glass about to shatter. I walked the perimeter of the block and saw curtains half drawn, lights flickering at odd hours. The proud homecoming they had imagined was collapsing faster than any bridge I had seen fail. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because I applied pressure exactly where the cracks already ran deep. That Sunday evening, I sat alone with Mary's sparrow bowl on the table and felt the silence settle heavy. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt the ache of a man watching the river swallow a structure he once admired. The people inside that house were my family once. Now they were only a case study in greed, betrayal, and consequence. Still, I wrote the final note of the week with steady hands. Collapse underway. Integrity of enemy structure compromised. Next phase. They did not stay broken for long. The first swing back came on a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. 2 officers knocked on my door with polite faces and tired eyes. A complaint had been filed. They said, harassment, threats, unwanted surveillance. The words sounded heavy in the small room. I invited them in. I poured water. My hands did not shake. I placed the sparrow bowl in the center of the table and laid out my folders. I showed dates, times, locations. I showed receipts for the camera and the places I stood when I took each photograph. Public sidewalks, parks, the library steps. I played them the only recording made near the house. A sample of raised voices from a public porch. Transparent, legal, boring. They took notes and asked the right questions. Did you ever enter the property without consent? No. Did you threaten anyone? No. Did you contact them directly after the bank call? No. The older officer tapped the orange city notice with his pen. He had seen this dance before. He closed his notebook and thanked me for my time. They left with copies for their file. I watched the door settle and felt the room breathe again. By afternoon, a different kind of knock arrived. A private investigator leaned on the mailbox across the street, his sedan idling under the maple. He wore a hat pulled low and aimed a long lens at my window. He was careless. I photographed him from the stairwell and wrote down his plate number. I printed a copy for my lawyer and another for the police. When a man watches you, watch him right back. Do it in daylight. Do it by the book. Letters followed. One from a law firm whose name sounded expensive. It accused me of interfering with a pending real estate transaction. It demanded I cease all contact with the occupants and refrain from any action that might harm their reputation. I read it twice, then set it beside the blue bowl. She laughed once, short and soft, then told me to forward it. She drafted a response that fit on a single page. My client has acted within the law. He has reported public safety concerns to the proper authorities. Any further contact should be sent through counsel. We mailed it certified. The neighborhood tried to decide who to believe. Serena walked door to door with a plate of cookies and a story about a confused old man. Victor nodded behind her like a metronome. I watched from the corner as Mrs. Patel, who had shared tomatoes with Mary every summer, folded her arms and listened without nodding once. That evening, she left a bag of oranges at my apartment door with a note that said, "Call if you need anything." I sat at the table and ate one in silence. It tasted like the sun in a season that had forgotten warmth. Cole chose a different path. He posted on social media, painting himself as a victim of a vindictive father-in-law. He used a photo of my porch from years ago when Mary had lined it with pumpkins. He did not expect anyone to check. A former coworker did. In the comments, she wrote about the casino nights, the office hours spent at bars, the way he slurred through meetings. People read. People remember. The post sank under its own weight. Emma tried to call me twice and hung up before the first ring finished. When she finally spoke, her voice had the rawness of sandpaper. She asked me to meet at the house. I said no. I offered the bank, the lawyer's office, or the coffee shop by the river where the manager knew my name. She said I was making this difficult. I said difficulty is not danger. We sat in silence for a long time, each waiting for the other to cross a line that would not be crossed. The city returned for a recheck. The same white sedan. A different inspector. He carried a camera and a roll of bright tape. He sealed the broken railings and photographed the missing permits. Serena tried to talk over him. Victor tried to charm him. Cole tried to stand tall. The tape did not care. It held. That night my phone lit again. Not the bank this time. An unknown number. The voice on the line was the man in the leather jacket from the casino. He asked for Cole. I told him he had the wrong number. He said he never had the wrong number. Then he said a name I did not recognize. He made a promise that sounded like a threat. When he paused, I repeated the words back to him slowly. Then I asked him to confirm the time and place. He swore, hung up, and did not call again. I wrote the conversation in my notebook and sent a summary to my lawyer. Sometimes the shadows step into the light when they think you are alone. They filed another complaint. This time it claimed I had trespassed. The officer who arrived was younger and more eager than the first pair. I calmly unlocked my door and showed him the time-stamped footage from my apartment camera for the hour in question. I showed my grocery receipt and the bus transfer still in my pocket. He watched the video twice and apologized. He left with a tight mouth and a promise to note the false report. I closed the door and leaned against it. I felt old for a moment, then steady again. My attorney and I met at her office with the kind of carpet you only see in rooms where people pay by the hour. She arranged my folders in tidy stacks. Ask me questions. and listened to the pauses between my answers. She told me we could file for an injunction to stop any sale, that we could petition the court to recognize the value of my investments, that we could request a temporary order protecting the property from unsafe work. She said we could do all of it now. I asked her for one more week. She studied my face and then said yes. Measure twice. Cut once. They turned to smear next. Serena whispered at the market that I was unstable. Victor hinted at church that I had become violent. I kept shopping. I kept praying. I smiled at the cashier and thanked the usher. I shook hands. I made eye contact. And I never raised my voice. People watch the way a thing carries itself. Bridges do not argue. They stand. At home, I doubled my guard. I scanned every paper and stored digital copies on 2 drives. I rented a safety deposit box and placed the most important documents inside. I updated my will. I called my doctor and scheduled a checkup because a man waging a long fight must carry his body with him to the end. The nurse told me my heart was sound. I walked out into the cold and felt it beating steady under my scarf. One evening, as snow began to fall in soft grains, someone buzzed my building and said they had a delivery. When I opened the lobby door, I saw Cole. His eyes were red. His breath made the air sharp. He held a box that did not come from any store. He asked to talk. He tried to step inside. I told him we would talk outside. He asked to use the bathroom. He tried to push the door. I kept my hand on the frame and my back straight. He called me a coward. He called me a tyrant. He said I had destroyed his life. I told him a man can only destroy what a man has built. He stumbled away, kicking at the snow like a child denied a toy. I watched until he turned the corner. Then I locked the door and wrote down the time. The next morning, a letter arrived from the revenue office addressed to me this time. It thanked me for my submission and informed me that an investigation had opened. It warned me that details would remain confidential until formal action. The language was dry. The meaning was not. A ship had left harbor. It would not turn back because a few stones were thrown from shore. I ended the week as I had begun it, sitting at the table, the bowl between my hands, the notebook open to a fresh page. I wrote what I knew. They would keep coming. They would try police, lawyers, gossip, surprise visits, and tears. They would ask me to break my own rules. I would not. I would stay visible. I would stay lawful. I would stay patient. And when the moment came to step into court, I would walk in carrying the truth like a blueprint rolled tight under my arm. The storm inside me had grown loud. Each folder filled. Each bell rang. Each knock on my door tested the steel in my spine. Yet one evening, as the city lights blinked through the frost on my window, I realized my chest carried more weight than the enemy could place there. It was not their attacks pressing hardest. It was memory. I opened the drawer and pulled out an envelope that had rested untouched since Mary's funeral. Her letters, dozens of them, written in her neat script across the span of our marriage. Some were short. Notes left on the kitchen counter, reminding me of bread in the oven. Others were long, written during business trips when she missed me. I unfolded the first one I touched. Daniel, it began. Don't let anger be the only thing that drives you. Anger builds fires, but fires consume what you meant to save. I read until my throat tightened. I saw her face in every line, the tilt of her smile, the warmth in her eyes. She had always been the softer half of me, the one who reminded me that people were not beams to be measured or bolts to be tightened. They were fragile, breakable, and worth holding gently. The next morning, I walked to the cemetery. Snow lay in thin sheets across the ground. Her stone stood under an oak that had lost all its leaves but none of its presence. I brushed the snow away with my glove and sat on the bench nearby. For a long time, I could not speak. When I finally did, my voice cracked. What would you have me do? Mary? Would you want me to destroy them the way they tried to destroy me? The wind carried no words. But in the silence, I felt something settle. A memory of her laugh. Her hand on mine. The way she once told me. Justice and revenge are not the same. Daniel. One heals. The other poisons. I lowered my head against the cold stone and whispered, I hear you. When I returned home, I opened my files not with the eyes of a man plotting demolition, but with the eyes of a man drawing a repair. Every photograph, every receipt, every affidavit was no longer a weapon, but a beam of support. A case not for vengeance, but for restoration. I sat at the table with the sparrow bowl full of letters beneath it and began a new draft. This one was not for me. It was for my attorney. It laid out my claims clearly, chronologically, with receipts attached, roof replacement, furnace installation, stair repairs, every improvement I had paid for, every investment documented. It showed my standing not as a victim, but as a rightful co-owner. For the first time since the night I was cast out, I felt air move freely in my lungs. My fight was no longer to watch them crumble. My fight was to stand, to rebuild, and to let the law carry the weight. I folded Mary's letter and placed it back under the bowl. That night I wrote one more note in my book. Remember what Mary said. Do not poison yourself. Build justice, not fire. I arrived at my attorney's office before the sun cleared the buildings. She had the binder ready. Tabs in quiet colors. Roof, stairs, furnace, bank notices, photographs, city orders. She slid a pen across the desk and met my eyes. Today we ask the court to see you. I signed where she pointed. The ink looked ordinary. The moment did not. At the courthouse, the clerk took our packet and stamped it with a sound that traveled through my bones. We requested an emergency hearing. Unsafe alterations, attempts to sell, intimidation, documented investment over years. The clerk read quickly, then nodded and told us to wait. I sat on a wooden bench and watched the morning build. Lawyers hurried past with coffee and bright ties. A janitor pushed a deep green bucket down the hall. My attorney reviewed our order of proof. Short sentences, clean points, evidence first, emotion last. The judge called us in before noon. A woman with clear eyes and a voice that carried across the room without effort. My name was spoken. And for the first time since I had handed over my keys, I felt myself stand up in the world. The opposing counsel introduced himself and began with charm. He described me as confused. He described my actions as spite. He used the word obstruction. He used the word elderly like a blade wrapped in silk. My attorney stood and spoke the way a builder sets stone. One fact, then another. She placed the roof receipts on the rail. She placed the furnace invoice right behind it. She handed up photographs of the stairs I had rebuilt with my own hands. She submitted the city's orange notice and the follow-up report. She gave the judge a copy of the letter from the revenue office that had opened an inquiry into Victor's accounts. Then she handed up a timeline of each call, each letter, each visit. She did not raise her voice. She did not waste a word. The judge looked at me. Mr. Cross, did anyone ask your consent before they removed railings and began to alter the interior? No. Your Honor. Mr. Cross, did you invest your money and labor into this property within the last 5 years? Yes. Your Honor. And I brought every receipt. Mr. Cross, did you threaten or trespass? No. I stood on sidewalks. I mailed reports. I met every request with counsel present. Opposing counsel tried again. He called me controlling. He called me unwell. He waved a letter that claimed I had blocked a sale. My attorney asked him to produce a signed listing agreement. He could not. She asked about permits. He could not find any. She asked why a stop work order was on the door. He said it must be a mistake. The judge raised an eyebrow and read the file again. The judge spoke at last. And the room seemed to lean in. She found that I had made significant and recent contributions to the property. She found that the occupants had engaged in unsafe alterations without approval. She found that efforts to remove me had not followed the law. She issued a temporary restraining order halting any sale or transfer. She ordered immediate compliance with city safety rules. Then she did what I had prayed for but did not dare to expect. She granted me interim possession pending a full hearing. The house, Your Honor said, is to be returned to Mr. Cross at once. The others must vacate within 48 hours. A deputy will serve the order today. I felt my breath leave and then return as if my lungs had been waiting for that cue. In the hallway, I thanked my attorney. She squeezed my shoulder and said we were not finished. We were stable. Stability in a storm is a gift. By late afternoon, the deputy knocked on my old door. I stood across the street under a bare maple and watched him hand the papers to Victor. I watched Serena's mouth move too fast. I watched Cole light a cigarette with shaking hands. I could not see Emma at first. Then she came to the doorway and leaned on the frame as if it were the only thing holding her upright. They did not shout at the deputy. The law wears a uniform that cuts through noise. He pointed to the lines that mattered and left copies on the table. He explained the timeline and the penalties for refusal. He left with the same measured step he had arrived with. The door closed. The house was very still. That evening I walked the block again. No one spoke to me. But two neighbors lifted their hands as I passed. In their small gestures I felt something that had been missing for weeks. The seam between my name and my place had begun to stitch again. At noon the next day, I met a locksmith at the curb with the deputy waiting in his car. Serena opened the door with red eyes and a tight mouth. Victor carried a box and avoided my gaze. Cole had packed badly. Tape flapping. Lids caving in. Emma stood in the hall with a suitcase at her feet. She looked at me as if words might grow out of air. None did. The locksmith worked with quiet speed. New keys clicked in the lock. The deputy checked the rooms and noted the condition of the railings and the walls. He recorded the time. He watched the last box cross the threshold. Then he nodded to me and drove away. I stepped into my house. The air smelled like dust and lemon cleaner fighting each other. The couch sat at a strange angle. The piano lid was open. The kitchen counter held a stack of unopened mail and a single chipped mug. I crossed the room and righted a frame that lay face down. Mary's smile returned to the light. I walked to the table and set the sparrow bowl in the center, as if it had never left. It caught the afternoon sun and made a small, bright circle on the wood. I closed my eyes and thanked the woman who taught me the difference between making someone pay and making things right. I thanked the court that had heard the facts. I thanked the steady parts of myself that had not broken under the weight. I did not feel triumph. I felt rest. I felt the floor hold under my feet. I felt a door open inside my chest where there had been only fog. Tomorrow we would begin the work of repair. Tonight I would sit in my own chair and let the house remember me. The first night back under my own roof was not peaceful. I lay awake listening to the creaks of the house, the sigh of pipes, the hum of the refrigerator. Sounds I once found comforting now carried the memory of invasion. I walked from room to room, touching door frames, checking locks, adjusting curtains. Each small action was a reassurance that the house breathed with me again, not against me. Morning light broke through the kitchen window in the same angle it always had. Striking the sparrow bowl on the table, I brewed coffee and let the scent fill the rooms. For a moment, I almost believed Mary was alive and shuffling in with her robe. Hair wild, asking if I'd remembered to buy eggs. The ache of her absence folded around me. But I welcomed it. Pain means memory is still alive. At 3 in the afternoon, the phone rang. Emma. My finger hovered over the receiver longer than it should have. I answered anyway. Her voice was fragile, stripped of the sharp edges that had once cut me down. Dad, she said. Can we talk? I kept my tone flat. We are talking. She paused. Then words spilled in a rush. I was wrong. Everything is falling apart. Cole is drinking more. Serena won't speak to me. Victor blames me for the audit. I lost my job last week because I couldn't focus. I'm sorry. Dad. I'm so sorry. Her voice cracked on the last word. It broke something in me, but not enough to erase the truth. I leaned against the counter, eyes on the sparrow bowl. Emma, I said slowly, forgiveness is one thing. Trust is another. You threw me out of my home. You made me feel like a stranger in my own life. Those choices don't disappear because you say sorry. She cried then, quiet sobs that carried through the line like waves. Please, she whispered. I don't know how to survive without you. I closed my eyes. For 30 years I had given her everything. My time, my money, my protection, my heart, and the first chance she had, she traded it away. You will survive, I told her. You will learn what it means to stand on your own 2 feet. You will face the consequences of what you chose. Her breathing shook in my ear. Dad, please don't leave me like this. I swallowed hard. Goodbye, Emma. The line went silent except for the sound of her breaking. I set the phone back in its cradle and gripped the counter until my knuckles ached. That night I poured a glass of good wine, the kind Mary and I had saved for anniversaries. I sat in her chair by the window, the sparrow bowl glowing softly in the lamplight. I whispered her name and told her everything. That justice had been restored, that I had held the line, that our house was ours again. In the silence I felt her presence, not as a ghost, but as memory settling like a warm blanket. The house is safe now. My dignity is safe. My heart is scarred, but it still beats steady. Outside, the city carried on with ordinary life. Inside, I planned what to build next. Not revenge, not bitterness, but something Mary would have been proud of. And so ends the story of a man cast out by his own blood, who returned not with fury, but with patience, proof, and law. A man who learned too late that love cannot survive without respect, but who also learned that justice can be built brick by brick if you refuse to bend. I lifted my glass toward the photograph on the mantel and whispered, "We did it right this time, Mary." Then I drank, and the house exhaled with me.